reassessing the Buccaneers draft needs as we inch closer and closer to the NFL draft. That and more on today's episode of Locked On Bucs.
Your daily Tampa Bay Buccaneers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, and welcome into this Monday episode of Locked On Bucs, your daily podcast covering the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I want to thank you for making Locked On Bucs your first listen review every single day. Don't forget you can subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. And of course, you can follow along on Twitter. I am James Yarcho at @JYarcho_Bucs, credentialed member of the media covering your Tampa Bay Buccaneers as deputy editor of SB Nation's BucsNation.com. Here with you every Monday through Friday, along with the everydayers. And for that, I want to share my appreciation for your continued support of the show. One of the ways you can support the show is become a Locked On Bucs insider. You're going to get news, rumors, updates, general thoughts, plus one-on-one conversations with me via text message. Go to joinsubtext.com/LockedOnBucs to become an insider today. This episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. It is a mock draft Monday, and we're going to dive into that here in a little bit. But following the addition of Randy Gregory last week, I thought this was a good time to look at the Buccaneers draft needs again. But I'm going to do this a little bit differently this time. I'm going to take a look at the Bucs' needs based on offense or defense as far as who they have on the roster right now. Something to keep in mind is that not all of these needs can or will be addressed in the draft. Without trades, the Buccaneers have 7 picks that they can use, and there's a possibility that some of those players don't even make the team. Now, you hope that 4 picks in the top 100 not only make the team, but are either starters or contributors as rookies this upcoming season, but 6th and 7th rounders aren't a sure thing by any means. So let's start with the offensive side of the ball, where right now at quarterback, the Buccaneers have Baker Mayfield, Kyle Trask, John Wolford. At running back, they have Rachaad White, Chase Edmonds, Sean Tucker, Patrick Laird. Wide receiver, Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, Trey Palmer, Devin Tompkins, Raheem Jarrett, Rayleigh Webb, Ryan Miller, and Cephas Johnson. At tight end, you have Cade Otton, Payne Durham, Ko Keith, David Wells, Tanner Taula. And then along the offensive line, Tristan Wirfs, Sua Opeta, Robert Hainsey, Cody Mauch, Luke Gedeke, Justin School, Luke Haggard, Ben Bredesen, Logan Sternberg, Brandon Walton, and Silas Sansey. So the biggest need that jumps out to me is still either left guard or center, depending on how the Buccaneers are going to approach the offensive line, essentially. You can move Robert Hainsey to guard if you draft a center, but the Bucs have to fill the starting left guard position one way or another, whether that's by drafting a guard or drafting a center and moving Hainsey to guard. They brought in former Eagle Sua Opeta, former Giant Ben Bredesen, who are both expected to compete for the starting left guard job, but they certainly both had their struggles when given opportunities at that job in the past with Philadelphia and New York. I have spoken numerous times about this being a need that the Bucs should address in the first 2 days, preferably in the first 2 rounds. And unless the Buccaneers truly feel that they can utilize Opeta or Bredesen as a starter, expect the Buccaneers to take an offensive lineman in the first 2 days. We're going to learn a lot about the Buccaneers' feelings on those 2 players that they acquired over the course of draft weekend. Next, I'm looking to wide receiver. And I talked about this a lot on Friday's episode with the potential loss of Chris Godwin after this season when he is slated to hit free agency. And the Bucs might be looking to find his replacement sooner than later to tie in with their need for another outside threat. So with Godwin moving primarily back to the slot position, the Bucs need that big outside target for Baker Mayfield. This is likely another top 100 pick position target for the Bucs. The free agent pool of receivers has all but dried up, and while They do have Trey Palmer and they do have Devin Tompkins. Raheem Jarrett is still a relative unknown. Palmer and Tompkins both show potential, but both are better suited for a slot role, and they are not going to see the field as often as they did last season when Dave Canales tried to move Chris Godwin more to the outside than he had played in the past. Godwin going back to playing primarily slot receiver. He won't always be in the slot, but primarily that's where he's made his bread and butter. That's where he's been the most effective. That's where the Bucs benefit from him the most. So that kind of limits Trey Palmer and Devin Tompkins' availability as far as being able to create mismatches. If you want this offense to reach another level, they have to get the big body target on the outside to complement Evans and Chris Godwin. Then still running back is a glaring need. Tucker and Laird are not effective in the rotation, and the Bucs need to add that short yardage power guy. Luckily, this is a player that they can find on day 3. They can still find a contributor on day 3. You take a look at Braylon Allen, Audric Estime, Dylan Johnson, Jace McClellan. These are all guys that are going to be there on day 3 for the Bucs when they pick at 125, or at least they're slated to pick at 125 right now. And they can all be impact players in their rookie season with the potential for growth beyond the 2024 year. Rachaad White is still going to be your primary back. Chase Edmonds is still going to get his snaps. You're looking to shake things up a little bit and bring in an effective running back as the NFL continues to devalue running backs as individuals. They still utilize them plenty on the field because they can be so effective and really keep the offenses going. So finally, tight end could use an upgrade. You have Cade Otton, you have Payne Durham. These are pass-catching threats. Ko Kieft is the blocker. He was drafted to be a blocker. It's fun and exciting when Ko Kieft gets a catch, but it doesn't always happen. It's not generally supposed to happen. He is in there primarily as a blocking tight end. Wells and Towla are replaceable. Luckily, this is, again, a day 3 need at best. It may be a position the Bucs address with a veteran free agent after the draft or even an undrafted rookie free agent. They have their tight end 1 in Cade Otton. You have Payne Durham, who started to come on pretty strong at the end of the year. You hope another year of growth and another year of development will get him more involved and take a little bit off of Cade Otton's plate. So this isn't a pressing need, but it's one that could help the Bucs if they do decide to go down that route. So as I look at it right now, 50% of the Buccaneers picks in the first 2 days need to be addressed on the offensive side of the ball. You have got to use a first, second, or one of those 2 third rounds on offensive line and on wide receiver. If you want to pull the trigger on running back, that's great. That's fine. If there's a guy that you're really in love with that you could snag at 89 or 92 there at the tail end of the 3rd round, fine, fantastic. But you have to come out of Thursday or Friday with an offensive lineman that can start at either center or left guard and a wide receiver to elevate the ability of the offense to put pressure on opposing defenses, to complement Mike Evans, to complement Chris Godwin, and to give Baker Mayfield another reliable weapon to really elevate the offense. But what about the defensive side of the ball? I am going to talk about that coming up next on today's episode of Locked On Bucs, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Game Time is now an authorized ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball, which makes getting tickets even faster and easier. Prices on the Game Time app actually go down the closer it gets to first pitch. With Game Time's last-minute deals, you can save up to 60% off when buying last minute for sports, concerts, comedy, or theater near you. I love the all-in pricing, so there's no shock when I get to check out. What I see is what I pay. Then, when I get to check out, nothing makes it easier than being able to use Apple Pay. It takes me absolutely no time at all from the moment I pick my seats to the moment I have them right there on my phone. And with their lowest price guarantee, if you find tickets in the same section and row for less, Game Time is going to credit you 110% of the difference. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Thank you again for making Locked On Bucs your first listen review every single day. Every day, just make sure you are coming back tomorrow. I'm going to talk about Mr. Wheelin' and Dealin' himself, Jason Light, and some comments he made about the upcoming draft. But in the meantime, are you watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your television all day and you have to turn down the volume with all the shouting? Make the switch to Locked On Sports today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel programmed for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Flipping the field and talking about the defense, who the Bucs have, what the Bucs need, and let's start in the trenches. You have Logan Hall, Vita Vea, Kalijah Cansey, CJ Brewer, Greg Gaines, Mike Green, and Eric Banks. Along the edge, you have Randy Gregory, Yaya Diaby, Joe Tryon-Shoyinka, Anthony Nelson, Jose Ramirez, Marquise Watts. At linebacker, you have Levante David, KJ Britt, JJ Russell, Servassier Dennis, Vi Jones. At cornerback, you have Jamel Dean, Zion McCollum, Bryce Hall, Josh Hayes, Tavier Thomas, Christian Izien, Keenan Isaac, and Quandre Mosley. Then at safety, you have Antoine Winfield Jr., Jordan Whitehead, Kayvon Merriweather, and Richard LeCount. For good measure, your punter's Jake Camarda, you're good. Kicker, Chase McLaughlin, you're good. Long snapper, Zach Triner, you're good. So edge rusher is still the top need and should be taken in the first 2 days without fail. I still like the addition of Randy Gregory, but he does not solve the overall issue, and that's that the Bucs do not have a top-tier pass rusher on the edge to get pressure on the quarterback and rack up sacks. Yaya Diaby showed promise. There's no doubt about that, but we need to see continued growth, continued development, and improvement out of him compared to what he did last year. We need to see that jump, that step forward in year 2. 7.5 sacks was impressive given the amount of time that he was on the field, but he's going to be asked to do a lot, and he's going to be asked to do a lot more this year than he was as a rookie, and he has to rise to the challenge. You still have unknowns in Marquise Watts and Jose Ramirez. You can't bank on them being major factors. If one of them ends up being a big impact guy, that's phenomenal, but you can't rely on them to elevate a terrible edge presence from last season. So you can't bank on Yaya Diaby being better than he was as a rookie. You cannot bank on Watts or Ramirez to all of a sudden emerge as a top-level pass rush threat. You cannot bank on Randy Gregory all of a sudden becoming a double-digit sack guy. He is a rotational player that is going to help. He does not fix the problem. You have to bring in an edge rusher with one of those top 100 picks that you have in the draft. The next biggest need, I went back and forth on, but I think I've decided that cornerback is the number 2 need for this team, in my opinion. I like Zion McCollum as a starter, and I'm really hoping that Jamel Dean bounces back to become what he was when he got the big contract out of the Buccaneers. But the Bucs are going to need a guy that can step in case of injury or to start to get an understanding of the scheme and the defense, considering how difficult Bull's system is to really learn as a member of the secondary, more specifically as a corner. I point back to the growth that we saw out of McCollum from his rookie season to last season, when his number was called a lot to not just fill in for an injured Carlton Davis, not just fill in for an injured Jamel Dean, but his number was getting called to come in and play safety. He was playing safety in a playoff game because he is so versatile, and he really started to get a grasp of what is needed out of him in Todd Bowles' defensive scheme. We saw a gigantic leap from year one to year two. There's likely going to be that same level of learning curve and initial struggles with any rookie that you take. So if you can take a potential high impact corner without putting the pressure on him of being a day one starter and bring him along and develop him so that you really don't have to call his number until the midpoint of the season or later, that is a huge, huge plus. If you can bring that guy in, develop him into a starter by mid to late 2024, 2025, you're asking him to become a starter because worst case scenario, Jamel Dean does not bounce back, struggles again in 2024 like he did in 2023, the Buccaneers are absolutely going to get out of that contract one way or another, via trade, or if they just flat out release Jamel Dean. So you want that guy poised and ready to go to start opposite of Zion McCollum moving forward. And don't forget, Zion McCollum was one of those chess pieces that Todd Bowles talked about. They may be looking for a corner to bring in and hopefully start sooner than later. I still think it's a better idea to wait until midseason or later before you really put that pressure on him. But they may be looking for someone to legitimately replace Carlton Davis opposite of Jamel Dean so that Zion McCollum can get moved all over the field like one of those chess pieces that Todd Bowles talked about. He's a versatile player. He's a smart player. And there's a lot of different spots that Bowles can put him in that will lead to success. This isn't necessarily a pick that the Bucs have to make in the first 2 days, but it should not surprise anyone if it's a pick that they do make in the first 2 days. The other position that I was going back and forth with along with corner is inside linebacker. Levante David is back, and that's awesome. We're all super excited. KJ Britt appeared to have done enough to earn a starting job. You have Servassier Dennis, who you drafted last year. He shows a lot of potential. You have JJ Russell. He has always been more of a special teams contributor than a defensive contributor. But replacing Devin White is important. And who knows how much longer Levante David has left as far as his playing career is concerned. So adding some depth there would be huge. Don't forget how many injuries the Bucs suffered at inside linebacker last season. There was a point that Ryan Neal was playing linebacker because the Bucs had only one that wasn't hurt during a game. So I could see the Bucs using a top 100 pick here, depending on how the board falls. But again, they don't have to press the issue. And if there's a better player at a different position of need available, then they would probably go ahead and go for it. A wild card position for a top 100 pick is safety. The depth behind Winfield and Whitehead is essentially non-existent. The Bucs have got to add a player there, but it doesn't have to be a priority pick by any means. With that said, if Cameron Kinchins or Kalen Bullock ends up falling to them on day two in round three, late in that third round, they might find the value too good to pass up on. And then finally, defensive line. Logan Hall has not quite become what the Bucs had hoped that he would, and they could find themselves addressing the position once again with one of their top picks. I go back to the mock draft that I did last week, where if you didn't listen, go back, check it out. I did dueling mock drafts essentially, where one, I took the best player available at a position of need. The other, I forced an edge rusher at the first pick of the draft at pick 26. And the differences were pretty stark. Most of you that reached out or commented liked the draft where I did not force an edge into round one. But I go back to that one where I did force an edge, and I forced myself to select Chop Robinson, and Jerzon Newton fell to the Bucs at pick 26. And had I not forced myself to pick Chop Robinson, the addition of Jerzon Newton would have been absolutely incredible for the Buccaneers. You would have a defensive line of Newton, Vea, and Kalijah Cansey along the defensive line. And that is an absolute nightmare for opposing offensive lines and offensive coordinators. So while the Bucs can roll with a rotation that they have of Hall, Vea, Cansey, Gaines, Brewer, and Green, they likely would not pass up a chance to get better in the trenches. And keep in mind, you bring in a guy like Newton along the offensive line. Now, all of a sudden, you can't double team everybody. You're going to have blitzing players come from all over the place. You're going to have one-on-one opportunities. It's a huge mismatch and can really help the pass rush. So another one of these top 100 picks at edge rusher, that brings us to 3. Those are locked and loaded. I think have to be taken in the top 100 picks of the draft. As for that final top 100 pick, it could be anyone from the cornerbacks, the safeties, the defensive line, or the linebacker. And taking a look at everything, I think we have 3 locked and loaded positions: edge rusher, wide receiver, and interior offensive line that have to be addressed in the first 2 days without fail, without question. And that's what I mean when I have talked about flexibility over the course of the last few episodes. This allows the Bucs to go in a lot of different directions with their first 4 picks in the draft, including moving around to acquire even more draft capital. It is a Mock Draft Monday, and we're going to talk about a 5-round mock draft coming up next on today's episode of Locked On Bucs. This show is sponsored by BetterHelp. It can be easy to ignore our social battery and spread ourselves thin, especially with social gatherings picking up after the winter. I know for me, between my day job, the podcast, and traveling every weekend due to my son's schedule, I find myself drained faster and faster every day, but still having to push through in all situations, telling myself it's for the greater good, regardless of how I feel in the moment, often ignoring my own needs in service of others. Speaking to someone on the outside without a personal bias in my day-to-day life can be extremely beneficial and help me reshuffle what I view as a priority versus what should actually be a priority. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire and get matched with a licensed therapist and switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. Find your social sweet spot with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/lockedon today and get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. Wrapping things up here on a Monday edition of the Locked On Bucs podcast, and Chad Reuter of NFL.com did a 5-round mock draft with trades, and I was curious to see how his picks lined up with the draft needs that I just laid out and the importance of 3 particular positions within the top 100. See if he and I see things for the Buccaneers in similar or the same way. But for the Bucs, Reuter had at pick 26 Washington guard Troy Fautanu. I apologize if I just butchered his name. That's my bad. I didn't look up how to pronounce it before I came on here. But Fautanu is the selection there. So addressed a position of need, interior offensive line. And he says, quote, Fautanu could go earlier because he has the skills to play left tackle in the NFL. If available here, the Bucs should jump at the chance to select him. They've recently taken linemen with the plan to change their positions, so a move to guard or center seems possible in this scenario with a chance that Fautanu taking the left tackle spot if Tristan Wirfs leaves via free agency after the season, end quote. Then at pick 57, he took Georgia safety Javon Bullard. At 89, Colorado State edge rusher Muhammad Kamara. At pick 92, USC running back Marshawn Lloyd. And at pick 125, Boston College cornerback Elijah Jones. Now, the Bucs didn't have a 5th-round pick, so that's why we only went to round 4 here, even though Reuter went to round 5 in his mock draft. So I'm not going to lie to you. I do not like this mock draft at all. And again, it goes back to the collective, not the individual picks. So I'm going to start with the first round. And Troy Fautanu at guard. He could be a great guard. He could be exactly what the Buccaneers are looking for. But Tristan Wirfs potentially leaving in free agency is not a good justification for taking this player in this position. Tristan Wirfs is not going anywhere. Jason Light is going to get him locked up. He's going to be with the Bucs long term. He is probably going to be a Buccaneer from beginning to end of his career. I don't dislike addressing guard in the first round, but the players that were still available when he made this pick, Laiatu Latu, Jackson Powers Johnson, Cooper DeJean, Kool-Aid McKinstry. If Latu is there, you're taking him. I would take him no matter what. He should absolutely be the selection for the Buccaneers if he is sitting there at pick 26. And while I just talked about safety being a need, taking one at 57 with Devontae Walker sitting there, to me, was a mistake. I would have rather had Walker come in to be that other outside threat at wide receiver rather than take Bullard, who probably isn't going to see the field much, if at all, barring any injury to Winfield or Whitehead, which, of course, nobody wants to see. I like Bullard a lot, but if I'm changing the first pick to Latu, and then you still have Zach Zinter or Mason McCormick sitting there in the second round for a potential guard spot, my pick would actually be Zach Zinter. So now you have an elite level pass rusher and you have a plug and play starting left guard in the first two rounds. Reuter addressed edge and running back at 89 and 92 with Keon Coleman sitting there as a wide receiver. So if I changed the first round to Latu and then I changed the second round from Bullard to Zinter, you have Cameron Kinchins and Cole Bishop sitting there at safety. I don't dislike the Lloyd pick at all, but with the players that were passed over, I'm probably taking Keon Coleman at 89 and then Marshawn Lloyd at 92. So I just changed his mock draft from going offensive line, safety, edge rusher, running back to edge rusher, offensive line, wide receiver, running back. Then, the fourth pick of corner is fine. I didn't see anyone taken after Elijah Jones that I was like super in love with, except Audric Estime fell to pick 131. I already had Marshawn Lloyd at running back, so I was completely fine with letting Estime pass and addressing corner there. But I think if you take a look at the collective of, you have, again, Washington guard Troy Fautanu. You have Georgia safety Javon Bullard, Colorado State edge rusher Muhammad Kamara, USC running back Marshawn Lloyd, and then Boston College cornerback Elijah Jones at 125. And you switch that to edge rusher Laiatu Latu, guard Zach Zinter. Who did I have in the wide receiver Keon Coleman, and then Marshawn Lloyd and Elijah Jones. I think Bucs fans would be much happier with my adjustments than they are with Reuter's mock draft. But let me know what you think of his draft. Let me know if you like my changes better with guys that were sitting there available when he had the Bucs take who they did, or anything that you potentially would have done differently. You can drop that in the comment section. You can let me know on Twitter. Insiders, you can shoot me a text and let me know what you think. But that is going to do it for this episode. Don't forget, coming up tomorrow, I'm going to talk about Jason Light potentially doing some wheeling and dealing in the NFL draft. You don't want to miss that. In the meantime, check out everything going on over at BucsNation.com. Follow on Twitter at Locked On Bucs, at JYarcho_Bucs. Become an insider. Go to joinsubtext.com/Locked On Bucs to sign up. Make sure you're subscribed to the YouTube channel and to the show on your favorite podcast platform of choice. If you don't have time to sit down and watch the episode on YouTube, listen on the go. Turn on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you like to listen to podcasts. I can go with you wherever you are. Hope you all have an absolutely outstanding day. Stay safe, stay healthy, fire the cannons. Want to thank you so much for joining me right here on Locked On Bucs, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.